Picture this for a second. You've got a kid standing in a food stamp line. He barely speaks a word of English. He doesn't have a fancy college degree. He has absolutely zero business connections, and, well, he is completely broke. I mean, it's the ultimate underdog setup, right? Well, today's explainer is about exactly that kid. We're looking at a story that completely tears up the traditional rags to riches playbook, because this isn't just about a guy getting insanely rich. It's about building a tool that literally changed how 2 billion of us communicate every single day.
You know, when we talk about people starting from the bottom, we tend to romanticize it a bit. We add a gritty filter to it. But for Jan Koum, let me tell you, there was absolutely no romance here. He and his mother relied on government assistance literally just to eat and get through the week. He's sweeping floors at a local grocery store to scrape together some extra cash. He was just a teenager trying to navigate a brand new country in a broken language, living a harsh reality where surviving took everything they had. Keep that specific image in your head, that sheer, unvarnished struggle.
Because years later, that exact same kid would walk right up to the door of that exact same welfare building and sign a contract worth $19 billion. Yes, you heard that right, 19 billion. It is honestly almost unfathomable. So how on earth does a person bridge the gap between standing in a food stamp line and triggering a multi-billion-dollar tech acquisition? Well, let's dive right in and trace exactly how this was even possible. Okay, so to understand this, we need to jump back to 1976, to a small village outside Kyiv in the Soviet Union. Jan Koum grew up in a house with no hot water, which is tough. But more importantly, he grew up in a society that was under constant, suffocating surveillance. His parents were literally terrified to speak freely on their own telephone because privacy just wasn't a thing. That deep-seated fear of being monitored, that was planted right in his mind from day one. In 1992, at the age of 16, he and his mom fled to Mountain View, California. Tragically, his dad, who was supposed to follow them, passed away before he could leave Ukraine. So it's just Jan and his mom, completely starting over. And incredibly, by 1997, after years of grinding through school and odd jobs, he actually lands a gig at Yahoo. But you might be wondering, how did he even get those tech skills? Actually, this is one of my absolute favorite parts of the whole story. While he was sweeping those grocery store floors, Koum started buying these totally beat-up, used computer manuals. He taught himself computer networking from secondhand books in an English language he was still barely grasping. Nobody tapped him on the shoulder to do this. There was no grand master plan to dominate the tech world. He was literally just chasing understanding. He wanted to know how the machines worked, and he went after that knowledge relentlessly, one worn-out manual at a time. So that brings us to Section 1. The ultimate rejection, a blessing in disguise. Things really start moving after Koum and his Yahoo colleague, Brian Acton, quit their jobs in 2007, took some time to travel, and then eventually applied to work at Facebook. And Facebook said no. Yep, they were completely rejected. Just take a second to let the quiet brutality of that sink in. Two of the absolute best engineers out there, guys who would soon build one of the most valuable communication networks on planet Earth, were told by Facebook's recruiters, yeah, you're just not quite what we're looking for. I mean, most of us would take that kind of massive rejection as a final verdict on our talent, right? But Koum and Acton, they basically treated it like a footnote and moved on. Fast forward a bit to January 2009. Koum buys an iPhone. Now remember, the App Store is brand new at this point. It's been around for less than a year. And Koum gets completely obsessed with his very specific, incredibly simple idea. What if there was a way to instantly know what your friends were doing, right there inside your phone's address book? He wasn't thinking about a flashy social media feed with photos and a million likes. He just wanted immediate, practical context about the people he knew. He was envisioning simple utilitarian statuses, stuff like at the gym or in a meeting or, hey, my battery is about to die. That was actually the entire original concept for WhatsApp. It wasn't even a messaging app at first. But here is the brutal reality check. That first version, it was awful. By his own admission, the thing crashed constantly. Nobody was downloading it. It was such a frustrating, messy failure right out of the gate that Jan Koum almost threw in the towel and gave up on the whole shebang. Which leads us right into Section 2, the quiet rebellion, building differently. Brian Acton basically refused to let Koum quit. Instead, Acton invested $250,000 of his own savings to join as a co-founder. And together, they rebuilt the app entirely on their own terms. What's really fascinating here is how they completely threw out the Silicon Valley playbook. Conventional tech companies back then, and let's be honest, still today, were totally obsessed with ad revenue, tracking your every move, and building flashy, addictive gimmicks to keep you scrolling. WhatsApp went in the exact opposite direction. Their promise was radically simple and totally unheard of. No ads, no games, no gimmicks. Just a fast, insanely reliable way to send a message to anyone in the world. And listen, this refusal to plaster the app with advertising wasn't just some clever marketing stunt to stand out. It was a deeply, fiercely personal choice for Koum. Remember that childhood in the Soviet Union we talked about? He grew up under a regime where literally every single conversation could be tapped and monitored. WhatsApp's entire design philosophy was a quiet, stubborn rebellion against that childhood trauma. He wanted to build a true sanctuary, a messaging app that didn't scrape your data, didn't track your habits to sell to advertisers, and fundamentally respected your private conversations. The crazy part is seeing how this radical simplicity played out in the real world. I mean, look at these numbers. Because they completely ignored complex ad tracking algorithms and bloated gaming features, they were able to keep the company incredibly lean. Get this, at one point, WhatsApp had over 200 million active users globally, and they were running the whole thing with only about 50 employees. That ratio of users to staff is just absurd in the tech world. They bypass all the standard corporate bloat simply because their product did exactly one thing and it did it perfectly. They also heavily avoided venture capital for as long as humanly possible, mainly because they knew investors would try to force ads onto the platform. When they eventually had to introduce a business model just to keep the servers running, they went with something defiantly modest. They charged a simple token annual fee of about $1. Literally just $1 a year. That was it. No selling your data behind your back, no compromising your privacy, and going against all conventional business wisdom, users absolutely loved the transparency, and the app just exploded in popularity. Which brings us to Section 3, the $19 billion signature. Full circle. By the time 2014 rolled around, WhatsApp wasn't just an app, it was a global phenomenon. It became an absolute lifeline for hundreds of millions of people who were getting crushed by expensive texting fees. And of course, that kind of massive scale attracts a lot of attention. This is where we hit the supreme irony of our story. The very same company that looked at Jan Koum and Brian Acton in 2009 and said, "No thanks, you guys aren't what we're looking for," came knocking on their door in 2014. Facebook realized they couldn't build something to beat WhatsApp, so they had to buy it. And they bought it for roughly $19 billion, making it the largest tech acquisition of its kind at the time. Talk about having the last laugh, right? But here is the kicker. When it finally came time to sign the paperwork for this historic, completely life-changing deal, Koum didn't pop champagne in some sleek Silicon Valley boardroom. Instead, he took the founders and the paperwork to a very specific location. He signed the deal right at the doors of the Social Services Building, where he and his mom used to wait in line for food stamps. He didn't invite the press for a photo op, it was just a deeply personal, full-circle moment to acknowledge exactly where he started. Now, you'd think the story ends there, with a giant check, but it doesn't. Koum joined Facebook's board, but as the years went on, Facebook's aggressive pivot toward advertising and data collection really began to clash with WhatsApp's founding DNA. True to form, Koum and Acton eventually walked away from Facebook entirely, and by doing that, they walked away from a massive mountain of unvested stock options. We're talking huge money, simply because they refused to compromise on user privacy. They protected their core principles over the cash, every single time. All right, Section 4, decisions that compound, the real takeaway. Let's ground this and see how this amazing story translates into actionable stuff we can apply to our own lives. Jan Koum's journey is incredible, but when we really strip it down, it's just a series of deliberate choices. Decisions that, in the moment, might seem totally unremarkable, but over time, they compound into something wildly extraordinary. So here is the framework we should all be taking away from this explainer. Step 1. Keep learning, even if you're deciphering used manuals in a second language, because knowledge compounds exactly like interest. Step 2. Treat rejection as irrelevant data. A no from a recruiter doesn't dictate the actual value of your idea. Step 3. Build for trust. A product or service that genuinely respects people is always going to outlast one that exploits them. And Step 4. Stick to your core principles, even when it is incredibly expensive to do so. Notice how literally none of these steps require luck, a fancy Ivy League degree, or rich parents. They just require patience and some serious resilience. Look, it would have been so ridiculously easy for Koum to take that rejection from Facebook personally. It would have been easy to just give up when version 1 of WhatsApp kept crashing and settle into a quiet, unremarkable life. Honestly, that happens to highly talented people every single day. But the defining difference here wasn't his raw coding talent. It was his absolute refusal to let the worst chapter of his life, the grinding poverty, the closed doors, the initial failures, become his entire story. He started in a line, just wondering if he and his mom would have enough to eat that week, and he ended up connecting billions of people who were just searching for a way to bridge the distance with their own families. That welfare line was never his definition. It was literally just his starting block. So as we wrap up today's explainer, I really want to leave you with this thought. When you face your own setbacks, are you going to let your hardest chapter define you? Or will you decide that it's simply where your story starts?